Surprise! You're probably doing it wrong. I sometimes do it wrong. Sometimes I even want to do it wrong because certain situations and the rules just don't seem to meet and make sense. But I guess that's kind of the problem when you take a concept like real-time combat and try and fit it into a turn-based game like Dungeons & Dragons or other tabletop RPGs. So let's take a look at that. I'm Jake from JNJtabletop. Let's get started. The rules for surprise in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition can be found on page 189 of the Player's Handbook. Here's how it works. First off, I know you want to call it a surprise round. Technically, in 5th edition, that does not exist. At the start of combat, the DM will determine if anybody is surprised. Typically, that involves some things like stealth checks versus perception checks, but ultimately, after thinking about everything that's going on in the situation, the Dungeon Master will make that call. Try to remember two things here. Number one, Dungeon Masters make mistakes. If you feel like that's happening, just calmly let the Dungeon Master know, present your case, and then walk away from it, because at the end of the day, the Dungeon Master does have final say. And number two, it's really important for you to realize that there are certain situations that are going on where the Dungeon Master just has more information about it than you do. The Dungeon Master knows whether or not a certain creature or target has an ability that you do not know of. There's a lot of things that are at play, and you only know your side of the story. So try to keep that in mind, and remember, everybody's trying to have a good time, and a little bit of humility is good in life and in Dungeons & Dragons. Surprise acts a little bit more like a condition like blinded or paralyzed or restrained. If you have what we would call the surprise condition, you cannot move or take an action on your first turn of combat, and you cannot take a reaction until your turn ends. Let's take a look at this example in basically what we will call a free-for-all style combat. And this is the initiative order. Jan, who is surprised, has the highest initiative, followed by Greg, Peter, who is also surprised, and Marcia. During round 1, Jan is up first. Her surprise condition is removed, and that's the end of her turn. Greg, who just so happens to be an assassin rogue, attacks Jan. This attack is nothing more than a normal attack. If he were to attack Peter, he would get advantage because Peter hasn't taken his first turn yet. Also, if that attack hit, it would be a critical hit. But that's an assassin feature, not a regular rogue feature, so try to remember that. Now Peter goes. His surprise condition is over, and that's the end of his turn. Marcia takes a regular turn, and then the following round and subsequent rounds would play out in a normal fashion. So let's take a quick look at some common mistakes when we're talking about surprise in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. Oftentimes, people refer to the first round of combat when surprise is involved as a surprise round. I think this happens for two reasons. First and foremost, it's just easier to say it's a surprise round because some people are surprised. It just seems like it's an accurate way to talk about it. But also, previous editions of Dungeons & Dragons have referred to it as a surprise round. For example, in 4th edition, it would almost function like some kind of an action point was spent where you could take a move or an attack or something like that, but you had just like that one thing you could do. That's not how it works in 5e. I think it really muddies the waters because many times, players that have been introduced to Dungeons & Dragons in 5th edition have been introduced to it by people that have played previous editions. So a lot of these bad habits and different rule sets kind of just swirl together, and really why you're probably watching this video. Everybody that is surprised during round 1 is not surprised for the entire round. It's a condition. If you remember in the example we had, Jan won the first round of initiative, but even though she was surprised. So the penalty for being surprised is she doesn't get to do anything, but because she was still quick on her feet, she's not going to be, say, granting advantage to an attacker or be subject to the assassinate feature that Greg had. So it's a little more fluid than just this round, they're surprised. If you look at the way that abilities and spell effects works, you often hear phrases like until the start of your next turn or until the end of your next turn. This implies that everybody kind of has their own round that starts and ends with them. it's very easy to look at things as if, oh, we're back at the top of the initiative order, everybody has their reaction again. That's not how it works. Reactions always start and reset once your turn begins and ends. It's just a more fluid concept than what we're typically used to looking at when you try and fit things into nice, neat boxes labeled round 1 and round 2. So technically, like if you were to say, look back at why something happened in the middle of combat and you want to be like, this is what happened in round 1, this is what happened in round 2, you would technically be correct in doing that. But in terms of how rounds work in relation to everybody else, it's probably more confusing, and it's probably a bad idea to actually think that way, even though technically you might be correct. So when it comes to the rules in 5th edition, that's how surprise works. It's a murky subject because there's a lot of terms that have been used in past editions and just other games that just kind of get confusing from time to time. But as with anything in Dungeons & Dragons, if something doesn't make sense, I encourage you to throw the rules away and just be in that moment and try to make sure whatever's going on fits your situation. Let me know what you think about this in the comments section down below, and how maybe you or some other dungeon master in a game you were playing in handled a surprise situation differently, but it worked out beautifully. Or maybe if you even have a horror story, I want to hear about that too. Lord knows the rules don't cover everything in 5th edition. Also, please subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell so you always know when we make a video. Take care, everybody. ¿Dónde está la biblioteca? Me llamo T-Bone, la araña discoteca.
Discoteca, maníaca, la biblioteca. Es el bigote grande, pero manteca.
Manteca, bigote, gigante, pequeño. Cabeza es nieve, cerveza es bueno.
Buenos días, me gusta papas fritas. Bigote de recobres, Cameron Diaz. Yeah, boy. Boy?
Yeah.
What? It's 2009.
Word.